Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Attacks of Opportunity. I am your host, John Sprunk, and my good friend and co-host, Eric Hardenbrook, is back for part two. We promised we'd bring him back the next week because last week we had a great discussion and it went longer than we thought it would. So we decided to break it into two parts to give you guys a bit of a break on listening. But today we're going to discuss the expectations of players, how they can change and develop over time. Where they come from and how to meet them, all that kind of good stuff. Great expectations.
Who knew we were into classic literature?
Yeah, sure. It's just a secret. So, Eric, you actually brought this topic up as a possible discussion. So, why don't you tell our people out there where the idea came from, and sort of the brain mush that made this all happen.
Brain mush is probably pretty accurate. One of the things that I stumbled across was an article that spoke about players of Dungeons and Dragons, particularly younger players that are getting into the game right now, who were not having their expectations met. They had different expectations than what they were getting when they started to play. And it sort of confused me at first. I didn't really know what exactly they were talking about because they labeled this, they called it the Mercer effect. And I was like, I have no idea what it is. So as I dug in, what I found out is that Matt Mercer is a dungeon master who does videos about Dungeons and Dragons online and runs a game, runs a series of campaigns online. Critical Role?
Critical Role? Yes, sir.
I had zero knowledge of this. This was not anything that was anywhere near what I knew. But I saw that this was the quote root cause. And sort of started to dig into it a little, and I thought it was something that was worth talking about because there's a certain set of expectations, and I think how you approach your game makes a big difference in that. Right. And we at the start of this, that's where we started talking about mood and things that you do in your playing environment. But I think the expectation of how you get there is part of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I know it's a hot topic online. Critical Role has blown up huge, and it's big business, and it's brought D&D, I think, to a level of mainstream attention and popularity it hasn't had before, which comes with all kinds of good things and potentially bad things, of course. And I've heard the Mercer effect mentioned a few times, and a lot of times you'll see on forums people bringing this up, and it often turns into a big, half the people are going to bash Critical Role for being bad, and half are going to hold it up as the best D&D possible, and it becomes a political debate, not unlike anything else. So, yeah, but I have heard of it. My wife and I have watched Critical Role. I probably watched about 100 episodes, which is like 400 hours, which is a lot to watch people play D&D on a screen. So I'm familiar with the people that do it, and I'm glad you brought it up. It's interesting. My first thought when you brought it up in our email was two parts. The first part, I think that labeling this a Mercer effect, I think, is a little inaccurate. I think it's modern media effect. When you started playing D&D back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was no online. Video games were very rudimentary. If you played a D&D or a fantasy type video game, it was very pixelated. It was very, 8-bit. So, and the stories were simple because they didn't have the technology to do it. Now you go log into a game like The Witcher or, any, WoW or anything. These beautiful RPGs in 3 dimensions with top-level voice acting and graphics that are almost photorealistic, and stories written by professional writers and edited. It's extremely polished what we have today to play. And so my first thought was, well, we didn't have that. You know, D&D was our attempt to make these kind of games because they didn't exist. So we made them in our head or on paper and pencil with dice. The this generation, you know, my kid's, he's 12 and you have a 16-year-old, and they don't have to imagine what a fantasy world or, you know, a fantasy combat looks like. They can log on to 100 different games and see it. You know, they watch a TV show, watch Lord of the Rings. The movies and TV have got much better too. So all these things, I think, when people sit down and play D&D, especially younger people, they're going to be thinking, oh, I'm going to play, you know, an episode of The Witcher. I'm going to play Lord of the Rings, the movie, not the book. You know what I mean? So they're thinking this has to be every bit as engrossing and dynamic as, you know, a top tier movie that costs hundreds of millions of dollars to make. And you've got one person across the table who's literally doing all the work of all the creation, you know, the story wise, and it's not possible to meet that expectation. I think that our generation had it easier as far as tabletop games because we've always grown up with our imagination being our primary tool for role playing and adventure. And today's generation doesn't need that as much because they've got so many media outlets where they can instantly feed that, you know, desire for imagination from somebody else's head, you know, rendered in 3 dimensions and blah, 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 like I said. So that was my first thought on this whole thing. But go ahead.
So I didn't have any knowledge, clearly, of Critical Role or what any of those things were. It doesn't make sense to me to go and watch other people play D&D. If I have that kind of time, I'm either trying to play or I'm creating. But in the interest of fairness, I wanted to go out and see. I don't want to be that person who goes, well, this is a terrible thing, and someone asks you if you ever watched it. No, I've never seen it. You can't be that person. You have to do a little homework. You have to get out there and see what they're talking about. So I forget which. I think I went back early, but I didn't go all the way to the beginning. I think I found a season 2, a start of a new campaign, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And or maybe 3, I don't know. Whatever it was, the first 15 minutes, and I honestly didn't get much further, but the first 15 minutes were 4 commercials for their sponsors, a list of production people that they wanted to thank, and then the list of product things, for lack of a better terminology, that had been in some form or fashion donated to their game.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not only are they voice actors and or film, TV, whatever, so they have that acting background. They have a production team. They have hair, they have makeup, they have wardrobe. Okay? I don't know any of the kids that my daughter hangs out with that have a wardrobe consultant. Matter of fact, I could pretty much guarantee the opposite. I've seen, much like any old man yelling at kids to get off his lawn, I've seen how they dress. They don't have a wardrobe consultant. But along with that, you know, they mentioned the professional artist that painted their miniatures for them. They mentioned the company that designed the specific and special table for them that they could play on. They all had custom dice boxes. These are all things, as you said early on in your explanation of part 1, it's a business. those things were about making money. And I think that, how you said, the media aspect of it, that's where the first part of this, it gets bent. You have this skew because it's a production. I don't know about you, but I didn't go to hair and makeup before we got on here today.
I showered. That might have been the extent of it.
That's good.
Hey, I'm here for you. I want to be attractive to you as we do this. So.
But I think you're absolutely right. I may quibble about the imagination portion.
Okay.
But what I will say along those lines is, I think kids today have a better filter than we ever did.
Well, we didn't have much choice, because if you got anything fantasy, you were so starved for it. It could be horrible, and you would glom onto it as the best thing because your choices were so limited. You're right. Today's generations, the younger generations, have a smorgasbord of media and all kinds of things to pick from, and which is wonderful. I'm more jealous than anything else. I remember being a kid and dreaming, about one day having, a game where I could log on and play D&D, as a virtual avatar. And now there's so many games to do that with, some version of, so obviously I love them, and I'm jealous that I'm not 12 right now to live this whole life over again in this modern age. But yeah, I don't mean kids don't have imagination, but maybe it's different. And ours was different from like our grandparents. I mean, how imagination is developed and how it's respected or not respected and how long you use it for. I mean, I'm sure my grandparents, if they were alive, would not be super proud that I'm 50 and I still base a big part of my life on a game of imagination. They would think that that's something for small children, and then you grow out of that. And I'm like, well, I never, I never will grow out of this stage. So we're all different, and that's okay. But yeah, you're right. It's listen, if I went to each of my people in my group and said, hey, can you each contribute 20 grand so I can get a professional wardrobe stylist, and I can get voice acting lessons, and I can make a custom set for us to play in, and high-tech cameras, they would all slap me and say, no, we're playing D&D. But yeah, that's a whole different thing for me. But yeah, I have watched it. So part two was, I think, just media in general is different, and how people have different avenues to get their fantasy fix are different. I think I loved D&D so much as a kid because it's all I had in some ways. So it was everything to me, and it has remained that big part of my life. If I was my son's age, I don't know if I could get into it as deeply. There's too many distractions, too much else to do. But the second part, the actual immersive effect, which I've had people use because they said it's huge, the Twitch, and then now on YouTube, the Critical Role, they have a huge following. They go to Gen Con as as guests, and they play in front of auditoriums full of people and get cheered like rock stars. So it's huge. And there is an effect on culture, obviously. I mean, everything affects culture, and D&D is a culture, right? So when these are our first rock stars, I think, and I would say, Critical Role, the people, you didn't know they were, but in D&D terms, after Gary Gygax and some great, artists, and could you pick out, Errol Oltis out of a lineup of people? I don't know what he looks like, but, the people of Critical Role now, they can go to a major like Dragon Con or Comic Con or Gen Con, and they are treated like, Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, Denzel Washington. They're that level of fame within this culture. They are at the top. So there is an effect, of course. People do watch them who play the game, and what they see sets up expectations, which is why we're here. So I haven't watched anybody else's video about the Mercer effect on purpose. I didn't want to watch some other person analyze that and have them affect my opinion. So I'm going to give you my unfiltered opinion, well, slightly filtered opinion. It's got and like everything I always say, it's got many different facets. It's got pluses and minuses. I'm so happy that D&D has rock stars, because in our culture, your niche, your hobby, your music genre does not become big and doesn't explode until you have rock stars in it. You know, if you like jazz, are there jazz rock stars anymore? Are they all from the 40s and 50s? Yeah. If you love indie films, you have rock stars there. So I'm so glad that this has come about, because the people who play D&D are not different than anybody else. We want content, and we want entertainment, and we want adventures, and we want people to look up to and talk to about this stuff. And it's brought a lot of new players to the game that wouldn't have heard of it if they hadn't watched the show. I know Vin Diesel also plays, and is one of the, there are actually a couple Hollywood stars that have come out and said, "Hey, I play D&D too." I think Steve Colbert plays, and so it's becoming more mainstream. And the plus of that is it gets more attention. It gets money. Wizards of the Coast makes more money, so they can use that money to put out more content, which helps you and me, because we can buy it if we like, and that that's a benefit. And they'll put out online resources for us to use, so that's great for us. The negative side, of course, is that I'm one of those people that does not like popular things. When I see something popular, my first instinct is that must be trash. If a lot of people like something, my first instinct is it must suck. Lowest common, right? The most popular stuff are things that have the lowest quality. It's not true, but that's my first instinct as a contrarian. So that's my first negative as far as having D&D blow up big is, okay, well, if it gets too cool, will I still like it the same way I did when it was an underground game that few people had played? And
Well, I think that is an important part of how you look at things. Is both you and I have that opinion of that it's this underground thing, that it's the sort of the secret club, and I have had to work really hard to move away from that, to be able to discuss this sort of thing freely, and and be able to say, sure, yeah, that's me, I do that. So in that aspect, I think you're right. I think it's super helpful to bring Dungeons and Dragons out, in a way that you move past all of the stereotypes that we lived with. So moving away from stereotypes and having that, as you say, that rock star kind of vibe to it, I think is super helpful. Am I going to sit and watch it? No. It's not really my thing. And the other aspect of that is, as product comes out for this, do you then get a dilution of the quality? Because I think there was a time, maybe not at first. At first, it had a very all Dungeons and Dragons things had a very homegrown kind of feel. But I think there was a time when you hit a peak of quality. I almost called it artisanal, and that's just shameful because I hate that.
So snooty.
Artisanal. But it really, there was a peak of quality there, that when you get so many more things, it dilutes that down, and you get a wide variety, but nothing really rises above that mediocre level. Don't get me wrong, there's products out there. There are things out there, particularly some of the sponsors, that I look at now and I go, oh, if I could have some of that, that would be really good. But that ties back directly to expectations and level of expectations based on where we are now.
Yeah.
We're both 50. We have a home, we have a family, we're in a position where I'm not worried about if I have to go buy a new module for $10 or $15 or whatever it is. I'm not worried about $10. I'm at the point where I'm looking at some of these things going, oh, I like that table. I like that piece of furniture that then adds to the experience.
Right.
I still can't afford it because the ones I'm looking at are really expensive.
They get up there.
But if I'm going to do that, that's where I'm going. So it is still a level of expectation. It's just different. And I think it's important to talk about these things with new players and talk about them in an environment like this so that you can help them understand and adjust where their level of expectation is based on who they game with. Where do you game? You know, if you and 6 of your buddies are sitting around on a couple of 2x4s across some concrete blocks with pillows and couch cushions, you know, and you have a milk crates with some plywood over it for your table, you're not going to get the same thing that you see on YouTube with lights and microphones and multiple camera angles, and it's a Hollywood production.
And that's something else too. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to cut in there, but
sure.
Managing expectations is a big thing for any relationship, obviously. And you know, I would say, well, you know, if a player comes to you and says, "Hey, I've been watching Critical Role, and our games are not like that, and I want to play that instead," well, I mean, I would have a conversation with that player, like, okay, well, break that down for me. What do you mean? Do you mean production values? We just talked about that. I don't have, you know, 80 grand sitting around just to make a set for you. What else? Well, you know, what are they looking at that they want to emulate? That's my first thing. I break it down because what it comes down to a lot of times is somebody sees something, a TV show, a movie, whatever it is, and they get this idea in their head. Have you ever tried to make your own movie? Like, got a video camera and like tried to like act out scenes with some buddies? Yeah, because you see a great movie, like, oh, we could make a movie. Star Wars was so cool. Let's make a new Star Wars movie. And yeah, then you watch it back, it's like, that ain't Star Wars. You know what I mean? It's like, it's the same sort of thing. You know, you can't see something that's put on professionally and polished and think that that's going to translate into what you homebrew. I'd also say that I would tell you, you know, with the player, be realistic and say, D&D is collaborative. I think I say this in every single video we have or add them on my own. D&D is collaborative. It is not one person reading you a novel. It is 2, 3, 5, 8, 12 people at a table fashioning a game together. Yes, the DM does bring a lot to the table with preparation and maps, you know, and make some decisions about what the adventure is, where it takes place. But a good DM also realizes that all those plans are up for grabs because a lot of good players will go off the beaten path when they can, and you have to be able to, on the fly, adapt, right? Because they're helping you tell a story. So if someone comes to you as a DM and says, you know, you're not playing the way they play in Critical Role, break down what that is. If they say, well, you know, their players go in town and have a great time and they party and they drink and they go to brothels and they spend 3 hours shopping for, you know, for bags for the backpacks. Okay, you could do that. I mean, there's nothing that says that your homebrew group can't do that. All that is possible. If they're saying things like, well, you know, they have such great voice acting. When I watch their show, I really get into the game. I'm like, okay, great. You have a character, right? Well, what's his or her voice? Let me hear it. Well, I don't want, no, I want you to do it. No, hold on, it's collaborative. There's 8 people at this table. I'll do some voices of the NPCs, and I love doing it. It's not hard at all. But remember, if you want to immerse yourself as a player, that starts with what you bring to the table. You know, people can't immerse you against your will, and they shouldn't be expected to. So these are kind of things that like a session 0 is great for. You know, before a campaign begins, sit down and hash out how it's going to go. And if you have an idea like this, hey, you know, we've been playing together for a year or two and it's been going great, but you know what? We don't do voices for our characters. It's just our normal voice. What do you guys think about we all, you know, try and emulate the voice of our character just to get into it more and toss it around? Some people might be shy about that. Some might be gung-ho and some might be in between, but you know, that's not something that you can't do. There's no software that, you know, that they bought for Critical Role that happened. That's years of practice of doing it. Start practice. You know, we do it all the time now. My wife Jenny actually loves it. She started about a year or two ago, and now every character she has a distinct, unique voice, and she stays in the entire session pretty much. You know, along with that metagaming or something, and it's been fantastic. She loves it. She gets a kick out of it. We love to hear it, and other people are starting to emulate her, and it makes me up my game too. So that's the next point is, you know, you're all in it together. Don't expect the DM to bring 100% of the package to the table. That's not how it goes. It's not that kind of game.
Yeah, and I will. I don't know if I necessarily say counterpoint that, but we don't do voices, and we don't have to.
No.
When we're doing our game, because that's not how our game developed in this particular time. Have I done them in the past? Sure. Have there been other times? I'll give you a story because I love stories. That's why we do this sort of thing. We had this one campaign, and we had been playing. We were really into these characters, and we were really telling this story, and we're all part of it. And we were just focused. We had blinders on. We were like in. And we were going through, exactly, you reminded me, we were going through town and we're trying to dig up clues. And I went to this place that we went to this, I forget what it was, tavern, something where we always went. And, you know, we went in and we knew who some of the NPCs were. And I looked at the game master and I was like, okay, so I'm going to order my regular. And when it comes out, how are my cheese slugs? And he looked at me and he said, well, they're really crispy on the outside and soupy in the middle, just the way you like them. And then everyone just kind of stopped and went, we've gone really deep here. Maybe we should step back and see where we are in this game and what are we trying to do? But there was no set, there was no lighting. You know, we were in that guy's living room, you know, sitting around the coffee table. With chips and snacks and sodas and whatever laying around. And that's something I noticed. Didn't have that on set. You don't have to worry about Cheeto corners. You know, where you have the Cheeto and you go, oh, I see you turn that page. The Cheeto corners on half of my books. But it was exactly as you say, it was the shared environment. It was that we were in that story together and we were engrossed in what we were doing. And we lost hours. We just played and played and played. And then someone looked up and went, oh crap, what time is it? And that's where you have to work on all the things that you said, the communication, the expectation building. I want to play in this particular way. This is the group that I enjoy playing in. Can we alter the things that we do? And sometimes the answer is no.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a group of people who they are hack and slashers. They're all about, we are going to delve, we are going to tear some crap up and round up some treasure and call it a night. And that's all we're interested in. And maybe if we want some variety, we'll lay out a gladiatorial arena.
Right.
And then we'll move back to the dungeon. And for some people, that's what they do. You know, I've been in another game where the game master was almost dictatorial in his approach to the story. He wouldn't let us free form anything. We were so funneled and so directed. There was no way for us to break away from that storyline. He was like he was reading to us, and a couple of us, because we're big jerks, would do things like, okay, I understand what you're trying to get at, but my character is going to do the following things, and then I'm going over to that guard at the door, and at my level, he's a door guard, I should be able to take him out. Well, as soon as we started doing those sort of things, suddenly the guards on the doors were 10th level.
Well, of course, to keep teaching you a lesson.
Because then you kick everyone back into line.
Right.
And so the longer this went, the more we were like, okay. And we sort of sat down and formulated it. We said, okay, we figured it out. That guy's the bad guy. And the game master kind of stopped and said, we're rolling for initiative. We're taking them out right now. And it killed the game because we broke the story.
Mm-hmm.
But it was more the point of, look, we understand what you're trying to do, and that's not how we want to play. And I think we probably would have been better off if we had talked, communicated, had that expectations, setting, level, bar, storytelling, where are we at? And we didn't do that. We just wiped that guy out, killed the storyline, and we're like, okay, why don't we move on to another game?
Yeah, it's all about how you click, right? I mean, I've been in RPG groups that did like 99% role playing and hardly any combats. I've been in the opposite, obviously. So it's nice when the entire group, DM and all the players, gel and come together and find each other to play the game that they want to play. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes, my biggest problem with D&D throughout my whole life has been finding people to play, and times to play together, scheduling sessions. So, if you're desperate enough and you just join any group you possibly can, because that's the only outlet you got for D&D, you got to take what you get, right? I mean, you might jump into a group that plays the opposite of what you like, and you have to either choose to get through it, and do the best you can, or leave and just not play at all. I think that's probably the biggest problem in D&D overall is just, game time, get people together.
Yeah, hands down, that is the most difficult thing. Any group of adults that has a job of any sort, your schedule just went right out the window.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult thing. And I think that's part of why I wanted to talk about expectations and things like that, because it's very easy to have your heart set on something and just not be able to find it.
Yeah, definitely. And part of it might be the DM or doesn't know what you want. I mean, if you don't tell someone what you like, and this might be with the Mercer effect. If Matt Mercer, in my opinion, has a strength, is the ability to bring NPCs to life. Not just his voice, but his attitude, his mannerism. He is high energy, and he can make you feel like the potion maker at the store you're at is an important person in that moment. And that's a great gift, and it encourages role playing, because you go into a store, in D&D, if the DM just says, "Yep, it's a general store, pick out what you need, buy it, let's go," that's one thing. You're in and out. You write a few things in your character sheet and you're done. If the DM chooses to embody that, the store keep, and engage the party in conversation, it's a whole different experience. And some folks like one or the other, and it's difficult. So I think people might watch Critical Role go, "Oh my God, they literally will spend 3 hours in a shop buying something." It's all role playing for 3 hours, just buying an item. That's how they're doing. But it's interesting because Mercer makes that NPC so interesting, you want to keep talking. It's an interesting conversation. It's a good conversation. So if your players are saying, "I like what they're doing there, can we do more of that?" They might be saying to you, "We don't want to just go into town, spend 3 minutes, rest, top off our water supply, buy new rations, and jump back out. Maybe we want to spend an hour or two in town and talk to people." But that's each group. I've had groups that hate that. I know players that will just be like, another store, really? We just shopped 3 sessions ago for something. Can we just get back to the killing? So you have to know your audience, and also your group might have different opinions on this. You might have some people that really want to talk to NPCs and learn the story that you're telling, pardon me, and get the feel for a new village, first time they visit a new village. Other folks just want to roll through and find a monster nearby. And you might have to sit them down, together and say, hey, we've got different needs here. I'm trying to make everybody happy, but you can't all be happy at every moment because it's not possible. You want different things. So if we're all going to stay together, the people that are hack and slashers have to be tolerant when we go and do more role playing, and vice versa. Role players have to also put more effort into enjoying the combats because some people will want that. And my job as DM is to try to strike the balance that makes everybody the happiest. And the bigger a table, the harder that is, right? So,
Yeah.
But that's communication. If you never have the conversation, even though people are pissed off to leave your group, all of a sudden someone doesn't show up anymore. You're like, what happened? Well, they found a different group that they like better because they never discussed to you what wasn't working with, for you. I know you and I both play with women, women, young women. And, you have to keep that in mind sometimes. If you've got a group of 5 or 6 guys been playing D&D together for years, and then you bring the first time a woman comes to play with them, she's new to the game, maybe or not, but she's new to that group. Okay, you have to be aware and have a conversation. Hey, guys, if it's just the 5 of us, and we all we're doing is eating pizza and beer and farting on each other and, telling dick jokes, that's one element, that's fine. But she's here to play D&D too, so let's make the effort, and vice versa. Don't treat her like she's a princess. Maybe she wants to come in and slay dragons and get bloody too. But whatever they're into, you at least have to make the effort to find out what everybody wants first, and not assume that they all want to play the game that's in your head. That's something I did when I was a kid. I was, a teenager. We'd play D&D for hours and hours. I never thought to ask my buddies what they wanted to play. I just would write an adventure and we'd run it. Now I make more of an effort up front before I devise a whole new campaign or a new adventure. What do you guys want to play? If I made a setting like this, what would you want to play and why? And I've told you before, we're starting an evil campaign in the near future. You have to talk to your players about, how evil is evil. And all this stuff wraps up into the collaboration and the expectations. Because when one person, it's happened to me as a player, is not having their needs met, which sounds so codependent, but it's it's true for D&D too, right? Over time, you lose interest, and then you start tuning out and you start wondering what you could be doing right now, and you lose people that way. So
Yeah. You get that one person that's always asleep on the couch, and you pull out the line from Aliens. Somebody wake up Hicks. It's time to fight,
they're on their phone, whatever.
Yeah. So I think you touched on something, and it reminded me of a conversation that I was having a little while back. I think there are some expectations that you can have across the board. And one of those is safety. We touched on it a little bit when all the women folk jumped on with us, but they didn't really go into some of the areas I thought they might. The lady that I was talking to actually said that she was physically assaulted when she went to this one game because it was mainly guys and they had no sense. Let's just stop there.
Right.
They had no sense.
Wow.
And so I can state emphatically that my expectation is that whoever comes to play, it's going to be a safe environment, wherever that is, safe and accepting.
Good point.
And I think that's something that's really important to bring forward about this game, because it is a game of imagination, and I don't care who you are as long as you have that imagination. And you mentioned the playing with women. With one exception, all my players are women. Dave is the only other guy that is even in the group. So, but that makes no difference, because we have one lady in particular loves to play dude characters,
Mm-hmm.
just tries to hump everything in sight. It's actually kind of funny, but well, and that's what she's going for.
Sure.
She's like, oh, hey, wait a minute, watch out, here comes the bard, and he's interested. And it doesn't really matter what the NPC is or who the NPC is or anything. So, but there is the safety and the acceptance of, okay, we're role playing. You're going to play someone who is not you. And you can have a safe environment to do this. So, I think that a lot of the other things that we've talked about, and particularly with mood, props, setting, lighting, all that other kind of stuff, and talking about the expectations here of voice acting and all this other stuff, baseline expectation, it's a safe place. It's an accepting place. It's a place where you're expected to have imagination. Bring your part to the table too.
Mm-hmm.
Get creative. Use the game to express some of that creativity. Don't let the rule book limit you. It says it in the rules, or at least it used to. I haven't looked at 5e. I hope that's still in there. But, along the way, it has become ingrained in me, which I know probably drives some people crazy. The rules are flexible things. If I don't like the rules, I don't use them. And I tell my players to ignore them. I tell them flat out, if it makes good story, do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a priest of whatever, and this particular spell doesn't fall in your sphere or whatever, but it makes sense for your character to be able to cast a spell like that, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Take it, get it, use it. Because the story, the expectation of the imagination, magic is intent. How are you using it? Does it move our whole thing forward?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really flexible about a lot of that stuff. Some stuff, okay, yeah, there's still rules there for a reason. It keeps a framework. The skeleton's still there. But there's a lot of things I'm just like, okay, look, I get it. We haven't calculated encumbrance. But no, you can't carry a rowboat too.
There you go.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's all part of expectations. Some people when it comes to rules, they want it, very rules as written, and they get very bothered when it's not that way. Other people could care less what the rules say. They want to experience the story in a unique way that has less of a framework. And there's no right or wrong way. It's whatever your table prefers. That's why, Gygax said, it's these rules, are guidelines. You're supposed to make your own fun with them. So that's great. Yeah. And so how do expectations change over time is part of the topic we're going to discuss, and I know with me, going from being, an 8-year-old to being 50, a lot has changed as far as how I approach the game. What I expect out of the game, as a DM or a player. It's, I'm sure I am jaded in some ways, and so things don't appeal that might have 30 years ago. So a big part of it is managing expectation. Session 0, and talking to your player before a new adventure, new campaign, whatever, and telling them what you got in mind. Or as a player, that's a good place for you to voice your opinion about, the campaign just ended. Talk about it, do a little autopsy. What did you like about it? If you want to say stuff like, hey, we got way off into the weeds with like, you had this character making custom potions, and that character was making custom weapons, and this character was trying to devise a new weapon called gunpowder. And I really didn't get into all that, that other side stuff. I really prefer to stay on the main story more and spend less time in town buying ingredients for a new potion. That doesn't appeal to me at all. Voice it, maybe other people feel the same way, or you might have to, but they might tell you we like that, and you're the only person who doesn't like that. So, but at least you got to voice it. If you say stuff like, I don't like, it's happened to me. My group been playing D&D for a long time together, and I had one campaign in mind to start next, and one of my players just said we were talking on Discord, and he said, I'm really tired of starting at level 1. We've been doing it so many times. I feel like I played the first couple levels of this game every single way, every single class combination you could think of. I would prefer to start higher just because I want to experience higher level play that we don't often get to because we died too early or the story ends before then. So, and I was like, you know what? So the next campaign I'm making up now, this evil one, we're starting level 5 is our starting point, because I thought, you know what? That's a great point. And it didn't occur to me, because to me, it's all the same. It's story to me, but I don't see it through their lens of being the players and what you can do, what you can't do. So I'm like, yes, let's start one higher up. My buddy Nick might start one at level 10 or 12. I'm like, yes, do it. Why not? Let's try something different. Shake it up a little bit. But we wouldn't have thought of that if Matt had said something like, hey, this is something I want to do.
Yeah, and honestly, it can be a real struggle. So I think sometimes my approach is a little bit different, because I have an overarching story that exists in the background of my campaign world. How you interact with that, if you interact with that, that's up to you. Mm-hmm. That story is continuing. There are a series of events that are going to happen in the world. If your characters interact with it or not is up to you. The adventures keep running into pieces of that, so they're gradually putting the building blocks together, pulling the pieces in, and they're like, oh wait, we have a picture of this. Mm-hmm. There's something larger going on here. My characters in my games tend not to die nearly as much, because we're building this huge story with them. But they continue on, and we get a little bit of a different problem. We don't cycle back and start again. We keep going and going and going and going. Like for 3 years, we had one campaign rolling, and it reached a point where one of the players is like, I should have picked a different character class. I don't know if I want to go on with this. And we're talking like 8th level, 7th level, 8th level. And she was just like, I don't know. and that can be hard, because then, you've got the rest of this story team, and you've got all of these characters that are 7th, 8th, working on 9th level. And how do you bring somebody new into that? How do you have a character that has that level of development? And we have a couple of house rules that you start a level behind the rest of the party. You're like, if everyone else averages 9, you start at 8. Mm-hmm. We'll make up a new character and walk through the steps and figure out some basic items and then magic that you would have at that level. But it's a challenge. It's really hard. And they struggled to, because they're into the story, because they're into the roles, they struggled to allow this new person join the group. It's the same player, but it's a different character. So in character, they don't trust this new person. They don't know who this person is. This person just rolled up on them and said, hey, I'm here to help. No. So it takes a lot of story adjustment and adjustment of expectations of how you're going to fit in. Do you build storylines specifically to tie that person in? Do you have that person build backstory of their character that ties in somehow? What mechanic what mechanical thing do you use to help that get over that bump and keep the players, keep meeting the expectation of having good story and having the kind of adventure you want?
Good point.
It's a struggle. It takes time and, like you say, communication.
Definitely.
You have to talk about it. You have to spend time and be like, okay, what is it do you want? Tell me.
It sounds like that is the one thread that going through this talk, is that you got to communicate with your players and your DM. I mean, no one's a mind reader, and if your expectations are not being met, you're responsible for making that known and finding a solution. It's a team effort there, and for new players, younger players, that can be some kind of a burden. Sometimes they don't want to stick out. They don't want to, voice their innermost opinion, and sometimes, and that can be tough. But no one's going to learn how you feel until you do. But I haven't had that much problem, knock on wood here, as far as expectations of my players. If you're a new DM and you're wondering, how do I meet expectations of this new group I'm forming? My answer is very simple. Just be awesome at it. Prepare, put your heart and soul into the campaign and the world you're playing in, and play the shit out of it. And that's it. I mean, I would venture that, we all have favorite groups throughout the years, and it mostly happened because it was just the right people at the right time. They got together to have fun together. It wasn't some kind of arcane formula you had to fit things into. Just be cool and be an awesome DM. It sounds silly, but if anything else, learn the game, play it, have fun with it. That's how you be an awesome DM.
Read a lot. We talked about books. Read a lot and make an awesome story. And don't be afraid to change the path of your story based on what your players do. You get some of the funniest moments. You get some of the most awesome, bizarre, I didn't think of that kind of things. And those will inform some of the things that stick in your memory for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Like I said, magic is intent. So we had one girl who was really unfamiliar with how certain things were supposed to work. So we're in the middle of this huge fight, raging combat all around her, and she stops and she picks up a helmet off of one of the fallen warriors, and she starts digging this little trench. I'm like, what are you doing digging a trench with this helmet? And then she's like, yeah, but I'm a sorcerer and I'm going to cast enlarge on the trench. And I was like, that wasn't really the intent of the spell, but it works. She's making a thing bigger, even though that thing is negative space. So we just kind of talked it out, but it was the intent. It was that moment of like, crap, she outsmarted me, because now there's a freaking moat between her and the rest of, these other combat people, basically. It's like, all right, she saved her ass with that one. On to plan B.
There you go. Yeah, you're right. Those are the best moments when the players come up with things you couldn't think of, and that happens all the time. And that's the joy of it. That's why you're not playing with bots. But yeah, I mean, that's about all I have to say on the subject. I think we talked it pretty much to death.
Yeah, well, and the other thing I want to say is keep in mind when you're a player, it's okay to help the DM out sometimes, because as a DM, it's really hard. The players in my group are all really sharp people. They're smart. They're savvy. And they delight in destroying my plot line. It's a challenge to stay ahead of that many people.
Right, yeah, of course.
And juggle all of those pieces and parts. So if you want and expect to have the kind of fun that you like in the game, help the DM out. You know, if the DM's struggling to get to, this happens to me all the time because I'm terrible with the rules. I'm like, oh, I don't remember the spell effect on that. What's the range? I don't have time to look it up. I'll ask somebody else to look it up. And it becomes, as you say, it's a collaboration. Everybody jumps in on it and keeps everything moving forward.
Yep.
So, yeah. Expectations. Safe, fun, creative, awesome, good times.
Definitely. All right, let's wrap it up there. That's a good place. And thank you so much, Eric, for coming by.
Absolutely.
And we'll brainstorm a topic for next time.
Oh, I have another one just as soon as you're done recording.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear about it. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. And please hit the subscribe button below. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next time on Tax of Opportunity.